Now I was freaking out. My dad wasn't home. My brothers weren't home. I figured the cops were going to haul her off. I didn't cry. I wasn't a yeller. That would just draw more attention to me. I was just kind of frozen, waiting to see where it all went. My stomach ached. One of the cops put my mom in the back of the cruiser. The other one had a talk with our neighbor. After several minutes, the two cops got together and conferred. Then they released my mom. What were they going to do? Arrest two housewives? As we walked into the house, my mom didn't say a word. It was almost dinner, so she went into the kitchen, started to cook. She was moving on. But it wasn't that easy for me. The next morning at school, a bunch of kids came up to me and said, "I heard what your mom did. She's crazy." They weren't cruel. I wasn't teased about it or ignored on the playground, and weirdly, I wasn't that embarrassed. It ran so much deeper than that. I wish someone could fix things. I wondered, how do we get it to stop now and forever? Can't someone do something? When I was older, around 8 or 9, my mom went back into the hospital. This time her stay was shorter. I don't even remember visiting her. And Anthony was old enough that he was put in charge of me and my brother until my dad got home from work. But when she got home, the pattern was similar to the first time she went away. She was lethargic. She slept a lot. She self-medicated. She still had mood swings, fits of anger, and moments when she just couldn't stop crying. Nothing the doctors tried seemed to work, and I know now they tried everything. I was in 9th grade when I began to understand what my mom went through, what those visits to the hospital were all about. The movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest had just been released, and my aunts and uncles were talking about it. They wondered how realistic the electroshock therapy scenes were, and then I heard one of them say, "I wonder if that's what it was like for Ellen." What the fuck? Electroshock therapy? On my mom? Twice? I went to see the movie right after that conversation. In one scene, hospital workers grabbed Nicholson and strapped him down to a gurney with giant leather belts. They rubbed Vaseline on the side of his head and attached what looked like a pair of headphones to his temples. When they flipped the switch, he buckles and gyrates. I realized he would have flown across the room if he hadn't been strapped in. My mom was half his size. If this grown man was shaking and convulsing, what must this have done to my mother's body? Holy shit. I was seriously scared for my mother. I wasn't surprised the treatment didn't help her. I wondered if it made things worse. At this point, Anthony and Stephen were long gone from the house. They didn't talk about my mom's treatment when they were around. Even if they knew what was happening, there was no way they would discuss it with me. So I just tried to process everything as well as I could. It didn't make me any less frustrated when she was struggling, but it did make me more sympathetic. Years later, when I saw Changeling with Angelina Jolie, I cried. The ECT scene in the movie was even more graphic. The orderlies took their time buckling her in, and the fact that the character was a woman and a mother, going through it made it a lot harder for me. If Cuckoo's Nest was a discovery, Changeling was reality. I guess I buried those memories for a long time. It all feels like it happened 100 years ago, and I hadn't really shared them with anyone other than my shrink as an adult. But one day at work in early 2010, I was hanging with Jason Kaplan and John Hine in an area we call the bullpen, which is just a row of cubicles. We were talking about our mothers, and I said to Jason, "You can't believe the shit I went through." Jason said, "Yeah, I've heard you and Howard talk about it on the air. What is it about your mom that was so crazy?" In a flip way, I told him the story about visiting my mom in the hospital the very first time, as if to say, "Look what I went through, and I'm fine." Suddenly, I got choked up and abruptly ended the story. Jason and John were surprised by my reaction. I got embarrassed. I thought, maybe I'm actually not fine about it. Or maybe it's just that I still can't believe what my mom went through.
Chapter 4. My Hippie Brother, My Gay Brother, and Me.
Most mornings when I was a kid, I'd wake up, roll out of bed, walk into the kitchen, and find my mom sitting at our faux oak table. She'd be smoking a cigarette, drinking some coffee, and watching the news on TV. Then she'd fix me breakfast. Cheerios and milk, my favorite. As long as I had that, I was happy. But by the time I was in 4th grade, my mother slept in more and more. By the time I was in junior high, she didn't bother getting up at all. Part of it was the depression, and part of it was that I was the 3rd child, and she decided I could take care of myself in the mornings. She'd make my lunch the night before and leave it in the fridge. I never even thought it was strange until one morning before school, a friend stopped by to walk with me. I was rummaging through the refrigerator looking for cream cheese, and he said, "Where's your mom?" "Sleeping," I said. Then he asked, more curious than accusatory, "Why isn't she making breakfast for you?" "I don't know," I shrugged. "She sleeps in." In my house, mornings were the quietest times of the day. Everyone, it seemed, found a reason to get out of there as quickly as possible. My dad was off to sell ice cream before sunrise, and my brothers, well, when we were all living under the same roof, I can't remember many times we had breakfast together. They always left early and came home late, just before dinner. It was traumatic living in a house like that, Anthony said. I couldn't blame either of them for wanting to escape the chaos, especially Anthony. Stephen was a bit of a golden child, very smart and very quiet, but Anthony was trouble. For a long time, before and after my mom went into the hospital, she accused him of making her sick, yelling, "It's your fault I'm crazy. You're making me crazy because you're so out of control." She wasn't wrong. Anthony kind of was out of control. In 8th grade, he stayed out all night without calling home. When he was 13, he used to hang out with a buddy whose older brother was in a motorcycle gang called the Pagans. Anthony and his pal went to the gang's parties and acted as mascots waiters, bringing everyone beers until the sun came up. They thought they were the coolest kids in the world. When he was 16, Anthony asked my parents if he could go to Woodstock. All his buddies were going. Naturally, my parents said no. That day, they left him to babysit me. Stephen was old enough to be doing his own thing during the summer, so there was no way Anthony could sneak out. At least that's what they thought. It was early in the morning, and while he watched the Woodstock coverage on TV, Anthony got so riled up he said, "I'm going. Gary, go pack your bag." I was 8 years old, so I wrapped a bunch of toys in a rag, tied it around a stick like a hobo. Anthony helped me. We walked out of the house and headed to Uniondale Park, where Anthony and his friends hung out a lot. The place was nothing special, some baseball fields, some tennis courts, and a lot of benches for the teenagers in town to sit on and figure out how to get in trouble. I couldn't believe it. I was going on an adventure with my older brother to this far-off land called Woodstock. It sounded interesting and fun and grown up, and since Anthony was in charge and said we could go, I figured everything we were doing was allowed. At the park, Anthony saw some friends. A bunch of them were talking about heading up to the concert. Another group was already on their way. Now Anthony was really pissed. I could hear him going, "Ugh." He looked at me and he said, "Let's go," and he dragged me and my hobo sack through the park. At the opposite end of the park, beyond some trees bordering a grassy field, was the road that led to the Southern State Parkway. We were going to stick out our thumbs and hitchhike to Woodstock. Seemed like a good plan to me. We stood on the side of the road for 5 minutes. Who knows what people thought when they drove by? A 16-year-old kid with hair that hung down to his shoulders and an 8-year-old boy holding a stick and a handkerchief filled with toys? No one stopped to pick us up or ask if we needed help. Eventually, I heard my brother start harumphing again. There were audible groans. "Fuck it," he said. "I can't do this." He started to turn around and then stop. This time he said, "Fuck this. I have to go to Woodstock." Then he stopped again.